Welcome to the Freedive Café, episode 19, with James Nestor. My name is Donnie, I'm the host of the Freedive Café. The Freedive Café is long-form interviews that get into the backstories, the training, the challenges, the passions, fears, and personal philosophies of the family of underwater explorers that call themselves freedivers. The Freedive Café can be found at freedivecafé.com. That is where you can find all the episodes and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. There is also a blog there, which I just started, but you will find a growing selection of written articles, my training blog, and stories of freediving shared by the growing tribe of Freedive Café listeners. And if you would like to contribute your story to the blog, get in touch and let me know. The Freedive Café is supported by a family of patrons who donate a few dollars each month through Patreon. And let me take the time to make a little appeal to new patrons. Because I do everything by myself for the show and I work a full-time job at the same time, it takes hours and hours to prepare for a guest, interview them, edit the interview, post-produce it, and produce their page on the website with the show notes. I do it because I love it and I believe in the growing educational value of this resource. One day there will be hundreds of hours of interviews available. As Julia Mose of Apnea Bali said to me recently, it will one day become like a freediving Bible. And the Freedive Café will always be free, so the continued and growing support of patrons is essential to keep me motivated to dedicate so much of my time to this project. If you believe in the Freedive Café, if you met me in a cafe, would you buy me a coffee? Do you value the podcast enough to even buy me lunch? You can basically do that by supporting through Patreon. And consider something like Netflix. How much do you pay for that each month? And what is its intrinsic value? What does it add to your life? If the Freedive Café is adding something to your life, consider becoming part of the Patreon tribe. Patreon supporters get information in advance about upcoming guests and get the opportunity to ask their questions of the guests themselves, and I hope to be able to offer more exclusive content in the future. Go to the website and you can find a link to the Patreon page there, as well as other options for donating, or go directly to patreon.com/freedivecafe. Okay, episode 19. On today's show, we have a very special guest, a Mr. James Nestor. Sometimes we need to get someone on who isn't a professional freediver. It gives us an outside perspective of our passion. James is the perfect candidate. He's not only been deeply embedded on the front lines of competitive freediving as a journalist, he is also on his own freediving journey. And perhaps what is most valuable is his deep connection to the ocean and what he has learned about it and the life in it. In 2014, James published his fascinating book, Deep: Freediving, Renegade Science, and What the Ocean Tells Us About Ourselves. The book is a double-barreled exploration of the various strata of the ocean and the life found there, as well as an exploration of the world of freediving and its potential as a tool to connect with the oceans. So we welcome James into the Freedive Café and learn a little bit about him and hear some stories from his time researching the book. And by the way, if you haven't read the book yet, thanks to Freedive Café sponsors Audible, you can actually pick yourself up a free audiobook version read by James himself. Just go to freedivecafé.com and click on the Audible banner at the top of the page. And through that, you can sign up for a free 30-day trial and download any audiobook of your choice. James's book, Deep, is a perfect choice, naturally. It costs you nothing. Audible throws the podcast a few bucks every time someone signs up, and the book is yours to keep. Check it out. Okay, let's pull up a pew and settle down for a chat with James Nestor. Let's dive. right, first of all, James, just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, you're not the typical guest that we have on the Freedive Café, which is to say that you're not a professional freediver or someone primarily involved in the freediving world, but as a journalist and a writer who has learned freediving and been exposed to the freediving subculture, perhaps you have a bit of a unique viewpoint, and I'd like to hear your opinions about our sport and our hobby. Not to mention that your book, Deep, is also full of facts about the ocean and the life in it. And since the ocean is our playground and our stadium, I guess the more we can learn about it, the better, as far as I'm concerned. And perhaps you can help us understand it a bit better. But just to take it back a little bit, give us a little bit of a background. Where are you from?
I'm from Southern California. That's where I grew up, but I moved to San Francisco long time ago, many years ago, and I've been there in San Francisco for about 20 years.
Right, so you kind of like bred in San Francisco and kind of tend to hang around there.
Yeah, I mean, San Francisco is great because it's 10 minutes away from an international airport, and I do a ton of traveling, so it's it's a convenient spot, and also there's great surf most of the time, and it's a fun city, so I've just naturally gravitated towards staying there.
Yeah, I hear really good things about San Francisco. I have a good friend who lives there and he loves it. Was life as a writer always kind of like written in the stars for you, or was that something you fell into accidentally at some point?
Yeah, maybe between those two things. It's never something I consciously thought I would be doing, strange as that sounds. I always thought I was going to be a teacher. And I have a credential in teaching, college credential to teach college composition, and got a master's in literature and all that. But after I taught my first class, I realized it's not quite for me. And God, I really, really have massive respect for people who have the patience and fortitude to do that. So I was mostly a copywriter, and I wrote advertisements and magazine copy and all that kind of stuff for years. It was a good job, and it paid my way in San Francisco. But to keep myself entertained, I would write magazine stories on the side, just at night or on weekends. I thought it was fascinating to have an opportunity to go into different worlds, understand different things through the eyes of somebody else, and did that for years just as a hobby until I got so much work doing that I just finally said adios to my corporate job and became a semi bum, which is the lifestyle I'm now living now and have for the past 10 years. So yeah, it happened kind of naturally. I never really intended to write a book, but as other people who have written books know, you kind of know when you know, and that's definitely what freediving was for me. Once I saw it, it just blew my mind, and I knew that there was something more than just a magazine article there.
Right. So your book, Deep, and for those of you who are listening and haven't read it yet, you have to go out and buy it and read it as soon as you can. It's kind of a wonderful exploration of the underwater world, and it has a fair dose of freediving culture thrown into the mix. There are too many questions I could ask about it, and you've obviously done a lot of extensive research, and there are all the different stories in the book. So I've chosen a few choice questions to ask that are most relevant to us as freedivers and ocean lovers. First, perhaps you could explain, how was the idea for the book born?
I was sent by Outside Magazine to cover the World Freediving Championships in Kalamata, Greece, a number of years ago, something like four years ago. And I had never seen anyone freedive before. Even though I grew up in Southern California, I surfed and body surfed and spent all my time on the surface. I didn't really do any scuba diving even. Years later, I got into scuba and all that, but I had no context for freediving. I had never seen the Big Blue. I had seen a few videos on YouTube, and it just looked totally very different in a way that I didn't quite understand how deep people were going
Yeah.
for how long. And so, it was the fact that I was so naive on this subject. That's what attracted the editors at Outside to send me out there as sort of a newbie into that world. And, the first day of the competition, my mind was completely blown. I was writing about William Trowbridge and saw this guy, take a single breath of air and disappear for 4 minutes and come back up. And he had just, done a dive to 330 feet or something. It just completely blew my mind. And, I didn't think it was, even when you see it and you see people doing it, it still doesn't really seem possible because it's so out of context. So, the next day that I witnessed out there was completely horrific. Just so many blackouts. Some guy was dead for 2 minutes, and it really all that romance and fascination I had with it kind of went out the window real quickly, because I saw people who had trained their bodies to do like the most amazing thing I'd ever seen, literally. And yet, it was so dangerous, and there was so much weird competition between people and rivalries. And, as someone who came from growing up in the water and surfing, that's kind of what I went to the water for, to get away from all the bullshit that was on land. But luckily I met a few competitive freedivers who had given up competition, Fred Boyle and Henley Prinsloo, and they said, hey, there's also another side to this stuff. It's not all about competition. Let me show you the other side. And that was a pretty interesting proposal. And so I took him up on it.
I mean, the book is not just about freediving, and almost, I guess freediving almost seems like the backbone to the story. But it's about the ocean in general. So did you find that these freedivers were opening a door for you into a larger arena here, into the ocean in general, and finding out more about the ocean and the life in it? How did that evolve?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to be clear, I met a bunch of competitive divers, Neary and Stig, and who had a very different approach to the cold hard competition, who understood the ocean in a completely different way and were just competing because they really like to go deep. So I'm by no means passing judgment on competitive freediving. If people want to dive competitively, that's great. That's not the sort of thing I really got a kick out of witnessing too much, especially after watching Herbert Nitsch do his, 830 foot dive. I mean, I kind of said, I kind of want to stick with this other side of freediving. So, I went with the next month after that, after I wrote the story, Fred Boyle was like, hey, I'm going out to Reunion Island. I use freediving to do research on sharks. Why don't you come with me? I'm going to show you another side of this. And I was able to see him interact with these animals, in a completely different way than I understood. And I was able to see freediving as this tool. It was much broader. And it intrigued me so much more, into the worlds that he was using freediving for.
And I'll come back to what Fred Boyle was doing and Fabrice Schnoller a little bit later.
Sure.
Yeah. So you let's just talk a little bit about your own freediving journey, because so you take us to visit the Japanese AMA divers at some point, and you're obviously not quite adjusted to freediving yet. I'll read a little bit of that for the benefit of the listeners. So you write, I take a breath and try to join Manu Sankey on her dives. But even with all my state-of-the-art equipment, I'm buoyed to the surface. My deepest dives are about 12 feet, that's 4 meters. My longest last 20 seconds. Any more, and I start getting claustrophobic and panicky, and the ache in my ears and head becomes excruciating. The harder I try, the more painful the dives become. I eventually give up. So it seems like you were quite amateurish at that point. But you eventually took a freediving course with Eric Pinon and got some coaching from Hanley Prinsloo. How did things change for you after the course, and how did your freediving evolve, and how is it now for you personally?
Yeah, physically, I think I was able to dive pretty deep and hold my breath pretty long. I surf a lot and I'm in the water a lot, but I had a mental hang up with freediving after what I had seen at the competition. It was, by far the most singular, amazing, mesmerizing thing I've ever seen. And also, I'll be honest, one of the scariest. When it goes wrong, man, it's pretty ugly. So those ugly images kept popping into my head. And that's what was really holding me back. So, Hanley and Fred started training me and just sort of, tried to get me to understand that this was a mental process. I should replace those negative images with the positive images of being in the water with other animals, with other people. And so right when I went out to Japan, I was just at the beginning of all that. And, I took the advice from some people and being a sucker, I bought all the latest, greatest freediving equipment, thinking like if I got all the latest gear, it would really help me go deeper and get over that mental hump.
Everyone does that though.
Oh, it's just so ridiculous. Like the good thing is I, bought such good stuff that I still have it all.
Never had to buy any more again.
So I've never had to buy it again. So, that's the one good thing about it. But, in Japan, with the AMA divers, these are women in their 80s with wetsuits that are 20 years old that have those big round masks. They don't have low volume masks. They use boogie board fins. They're about, 3 inches long. And they're going down 50, 60, 70 feet, and they're in their 80s and they've been diving every day. So it just sort of showed me, the real problems with being overgeared and undergridded. Yeah. And it was really inspiring to see their connection with the water because it was completely different than the Western approach. I mean, they were just ocean animals and they just understood its rhythms in a way that I've never really seen anyone before.
Do you think you've now transcended that those difficulties that you had psychologically when you started? Is freediving much more pleasurable for you now?
Oh yeah, and what was interesting is the book came out a couple years ago, and it's once it came out, that's when I really started taking to freediving. So after I had written all that stuff, so this wasn't just something I wrote about and moved on to. It's something freediving is something I think about all the time, and I try to do as much as I possibly can. It's hard in San Francisco. The water's super cloudy. It's very bad tides, but I go up north or go south to Monterey and dive as much as I can because it's just the coolest thing I've ever done, and it's definitely become a huge part of my life. And I'd like to think I've advanced quite a bit since I was out in Japan.
That's great. Good to hear. So talking of the AMA, do you think that you were seeing the last of that culture of divers?
Well, it's interesting because in Japan, the AMA are promoted all over the place as kind of a tourist device. So there's this place called Toba where you can, quote unquote, see the AMA in their traditional gear with their wicker baskets, diving for oysters. But they're just tourist props. Yeah, so it's a show. It's a good show. It's cool. People enjoy it, but it's not real. And so what was cool about these AMA, and it took me a long time to find them, a lot of false starts and dead ends, is the second I took out my camera, they wanted me to put it away. They didn't want to talk to me. They didn't want to be interviewed. They just had zero interest in media attention, which really made me respect them a lot more. They were just out there doing what they do for no other reason than they liked it, and it was part of their life. So that just kind of showed me how legit they were. And are they the last working AMA? I don't know. I didn't check out, as much of Japan as I was able to with the time I was given, but I'm sure they're around the last like true working AMA who have just been carrying on this tradition. And, I think about them a lot too. I'd love to go back out there and see if they remember me.
I think there's also, there's like a South Korean analog to the AMA as well. I forget their names. Did you ever hear anything about them?
Oh yeah. And there's a lot of rivalry
really?
between those two groups, because the Koreans claim that they were first. And they're the original, sea women. And then the Japanese claim that they were for, there's so much weird competition between those countries and cultures. So, I've never been out with them. I had the opportunity about a year and a half, but I couldn't do it because of scheduling. But, these are really hard cultures to sort of penetrate,
yeah, because
they just don't, as opposed to nowadays and younger people, they just don't really care about you, or that, you're going to promote them in a magazine or whatever. They're out there working and doing their thing. With the AMA in Japan, I had to come back and keep coming back at dawn to show them like I was dedicated to learning about them, not just snapping a picture and taking off.
Yeah, just
and
to crack open the door a little bit.
Yeah, and they let me in, and they had and they were just mocking me the whole time, I'm sure, but that's cool. And at the end of it, I think they actually enjoyed it. So, there's also this weird sort of male-female deal going on in Japan too. The women hang out with the women, men hang out with the men. So, I would love to go a little further into that culture and to explore it a bit more, given time. Hopefully I will.
Have you heard about or come across since then other traditional freediving cultures that you'd be interested in, or you'd like to one day visit and find out more about?
Sure. I went to Thailand to hang out with a Moken about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, right after Deep came out. And it's a pretty interesting experience. Also kind of sad because these people have been really abused by the government so much. And, there were people who live 6 months out of the year at sea, and they can't really do that anymore. But hopefully that's changing. They've just been granted by the UN some islands off the coast of Myanmar. So I would love to go back out there and to see them flourishing. But it's pretty amazing to see their abilities. Again, here are people that they don't have 4-foot long fins or, the latest freediving wetsuits or low volume masks. They go down there with nothing, no goggles, no fins, no anything, and walk around on the seafloor, just cruising around. And it's pretty badass. I know it takes generations to reach that level, but pretty inspiring. There's also the Philippines freedivers, the Badu, I think is their name. And I was almost able to go out and to do some work with them about 6 months ago. I'm hoping to do that next year. But I'm fascinated with these cultures that are just barely hanging on now, but they just have so much to teach us. We have so much to learn if we care to listen,
From the traveling and the research and what you've experienced, what do you think is the most interesting thing you found out about freediving in terms of human potential?
Human potential, I mean, just the fact that we're programmed and built to do all this stuff is still something that blows me away. And when you feel those mammalian dive reflexes click on when you're diving, it never ceases to really give me a thrill. It's like you're digging up some old genetic memories from millions of years ago, But I think that the thing about freediving that to me has been endlessly fascinating and something that I'm really active in now is its ability to allow you to really get close with with oceanic animals and commune with them in a way that you just can't and by any other means. Like scuba doesn't come close. The access you get into that hidden world of marine life is something that I just think is pretty incredible, and something that I don't think a lot of people who aren't freedivers really understand. And it's it's interesting stuff.
So in the beginning part of your book, you sometimes paint, when we talked a little bit about it before, but you paint a picture of the competitive freediving world. I guess you could say it's quite unflattering. So there's a little, I'll read a little bit here. Over the next 4 days, I watched several more competitors attempt dives to around 300 feet. Many can't make it and turn back. They resurface with blood running down their faces from their noses, unconscious or in cardiac arrest. So for our listeners who tend to be really into competitions and competition-style diving, as someone with a different perspective of the whole scene, what do you consider the negative aspects of freediving as a sport? Do you have some things to suggest we might bear in mind?
Yeah, and I know I mentioned this before, but for an outsider, especially a reporter, to be taken into competitive freediving and to see that stuff it's pretty shocking. And I don't think there's really any other way of saying that. I'd like to think what I provided was a very clear and I thought accurate view of what it was like for me, a reporter with no experience in this stuff, to go into this world and see. And everything's documented. It's all of that stuff happened. And I heard from other competitive freedivers that was the worst competition they've ever had. The amount of blackouts and the amount of problems, which is interesting because, I think if maybe I would have gone to another competition, my view of it might have been slightly changed, but not completely. I think once you're inside of, that culture, that stuff becomes more routine, because that's part of it. People black out. You understand it. You understand that blackout isn't going to cause brain damage. You understand a little bit of blood usually isn't that big of a deal. But for someone from the outside to see that, it's a different story. So it's my advice would was that your question?
I guess so. I mean, I think a lot of competitive freedivers might be blinkered somewhat or desensitized to the way it seems to outsiders, the way it appears to outsiders when these things happen. I mean, we had this controversy this year at the World Championships as well, especially since there was a much bigger reach for the audience with the dive eye.
Yeah.
But, we've been talking with some guests about the possibility of freediving going to the Olympics. Some have said, if somebody is watching this happen, it's just not going to go to the Olympics because you wouldn't have this kind of carnage on the Olympics. So something has to change in the attitude of the competition organizers, the organizations that put on the competitions, and also the attitudes of the divers themselves and how they approach their training.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with all of what you said there. Two things is, after the story came out, so many competitive divers wrote me and said, wow, I've been inside of this world for so long. I didn't realize that. You've opened my eyes. Thank you. And then I've heard the complete opposite, where people are like, oh, you were totally exaggerating. What's a little blood? It wasn't a big deal. You were just blah, blah, blah. But everything that I wrote about there happened, and there were pictures of it happening. And there's pictures of the dead guy, and there's pictures of the bloody faces and all that. And I think most of all, competitive freedivers have to acknowledge that for people from the outside to see this stuff, it looks really dangerous and really violent. And there's no way around that. As I said, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And it's one of the most, when it doesn't work out, it's one of the most horrifying things that I recall seeing. And maybe that sounds melodramatic to some competitive freedivers, but I was there. I wasn't phoning it in. I showed up. I talked with everyone. I interviewed people for hours. If people, and just to be clear again, if people want to dive competitively, I think anyone should be free to do whatever they want to do. If that's how they want to connect with the water, I think that's awesome. My personal opinion is that that isn't the sort of free diving that I'm really going to enrich myself and involve myself in. There's that other side that I'm much more interested in.
Yeah, I think it's just maybe important for free divers and organizations to bear in mind that as the sport grows and it's exploding right now and becomes more popular, and as a hobby it becomes more popular, that it might be helpful to be open-minded about this, because we'd like to deflect negativity coming from people who don't do it, and who might possibly damage the sport, or damage freediving as a recreational activity if they see too much of this kind of thing. And I think I think everybody agrees that there's a middle ground that we can have between freediving recreationally and pushing ourselves to the absolute limits in competition. We can still push ourselves to certain limits, but without just going too far.
Yeah, I think you nailed it there. Because there's some competitors, like I think Neary was saying, that he hasn't blacked out in 10 years. And he dives to these insane depths all the time. So there's a lot of personal responsibility that needs to really be taken into consideration here. Dive your limits. Know your limit. And I think that's a mantra that should just be repeated over and over, because if it is going to become a broader sport for public viewing, there can't be bloody blackouts. There just can't. It's not going to work. It's like, by the third day when I saw someone blacking out the surface, I was like, okay, it still freaks me out, but it's not that bad. They're awake. 3 seconds later, they're fine. They're laughing about it. They'll never do that again. But I just don't think you can have those real horrific ones and think you're going to reach a wider audience there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that for people who are getting into competitive freediving now, the reason that guys like Neri and Trubridge, haven't blacked out very often and not in such a long time is because they've taken 10 years to get to where they are.
Exactly.
There's a lot of people who go into freediving now who are trying to get to 100 meters within 2 or 3 years of starting their training, which is possible, but it's not really, they're not really organically moving into that area without potentially doing themselves a lot of harm.
You're exactly right. And all these new techniques are great to help you along, but you just can't take the techniques without the adaptation. It's like you need to let your body really adapt to those depths and to understand what it's like to be down there. I think Fred Boyle was saying it took him something like 5 years to make it to 100 feet. And then once you're at 100 feet, like he kind of understood it more. And that's why I think, maybe to start freediving, not just diving up and down a rope and trying to be better than your buddy or whatever, but to enjoy it and really understand all those reflexes that are happening in your body and understand that connection to the ocean. Like, to me, that's where the real magic is. I think that diving on a rope is great for training once you already kind of have that in your system and in your soul, But I know people who have, written me and have said, hey man, my first weekend out, I made it to 130 feet. I'm going to try to make it to 160 feet. Thanks for introducing me to the sport. I'm just like, oh no. That was the exact opposite message that I was trying to communicate in this book, is to follow your heart and to follow how you feel, not to follow the numbers or your dive watch. And I think that's where the real soul of freediving should be, is that experience and that connection to the water.
Yeah, well said. So, of the experiences that you write about in the book, which do you think had the most profound effect on you? And is there anything that you experienced that is kind of influencing what's happening in your life now?
Yeah, I would have to say it was diving with whales. And that's the answer to both of those questions, because that was kind of the culmination of my freediving, at least at that point. I finally got it out in Sri Lanka. I was able to dive pretty deep, at least for me. And I was so comfortable doing it, and it just felt so natural to be down there. And then you add into the mix, a 60-foot long sperm whale that's shooting communication at you. And, wow, does it get any cooler than that? And you can only do that through freediving. So freediving was really the gate, that you had to open in order to experience this animal and the incredible intelligence of the ocean. And so, that's still a very big part of my life. I'm working with a Harvard researcher and a huge group of researchers right now. We're trying to keep it a little on the lower key end of building some machines to try to decode sperm whale communication and to use freediving to do that. That's on the website. I don't know if I have that on my own personal website, but SETI.foundation, www.seti.foundation. And in March, we're going to have a whole drone system up and ready, and we're going to go try to do this. Will it work? Maybe. But we feel that someone should try to do this.
Well, you never know if you don't try.
Don't know if you don't try. And what's cool is I'm not an academic, so I'm not hindered by any of the rules and regulations of those institutions. So I can just do super weird stuff and not worry about my tenure or whatever. And I'm blessed to be around a researcher, David Gruber, National Geographic explorer, amazing guy who's done a bunch of work into bioluminescent jellyfish communication as well. And he's the one that's really put the pedal on the metal for this stuff. So we're pumped for this new year.
That's fascinating. I can't wait to find out more about it. So yeah, you were in Sri Lanka with Fabrice Snoller and his team, right?
Yes.
And
yeah,
you were studying the communication, like the clicks and other sounds and methods that these sperm whales use to communicate. What kind of conclusions are Schnoller and his team coming to about these animals? Like, what extent do you think that we underestimate the intelligence of them, if at all?
Yeah, we were out there trying to collect these clicks with some machines that Fabrice made, which didn't work too well. But I mean, what he really turned me on to, which I'm so grateful for, was that his knowledge of these animals and the different potential of communication. We're so used to considering communication only through vocal communication, the way that we're communicating right now with words and with sounds. But there are likely many different other forms of communication out there in the animal kingdom, and especially with cetaceans. These are animals who view the world through echolocation and are probably able to send echolocative images to one another as well. And that's not my theory. That this is something that's been theorized for a long time, but no one's really been able to study it. Mostly because, at least in the wild, people haven't been able to get close enough to sperm whales and really interact with them in any real way. But what we do know is, after 40 years of researchers doing incredible work into sperm whale communication, we know that there is some sort of embedded code within these clicks. There's no doubt about that. They're sending 1,600 clicks in a single second in some cases. And they can repeat these things over and over again. So
repeat exactly the same sequence of clicks.
Yeah, and then alter discrete frequencies in between them. So, you send this to a physicist, like, nobody doubts there isn't information in this. Like, nobody doubts that. But we just don't know what it is. And So that's what I think that we're going to learn what it is through machine learning, through AI, through these new technologies, are going to be allow us to access into what this is. And that's the same thing that's happening with bat communication and with mouse communication. There's a lot of work being done into that world right now. And I'm particularly interested in cetacean communication, dolphin and sperm whale.
Fascinating. Let's talk about the ocean a little bit and what's happening to it now. There are many problems. I would say most of them the result of human actions like overfishing and population, warming temperatures, to name the big ones. Would you say you're generally pessimistic or optimistic about the future of the oceans?
Oh man, I don't know how to answer that. I will say that the realist in me knows things are pretty bad. I've been privileged enough to be able to see the ocean in its many different moods, in many different locations all over the planet, for the past few years. And honestly, what I've seen is really grim. Thailand was a desert. Brazil was a desert. It's really bad, which doesn't mean it can't grow back. I mean, look at a place like Palau, right? They didn't do anything. They didn't create fish farms. They just left it alone.
Just left it alone for a while, yeah.
Or look at Cabo Polmo in Baja, California, where 20 years ago they're like, let's just not fish in this tiny little area and see what happens. I don't know if you've ever been out there, but I was freediving out in these, huge bait balls out there, and it's outrageous. And that's what the ocean used to look like everywhere. So, the hopeful message here is the ocean in a lot of ways can heal itself. These populations can come back, and, but what is it going to take for people to leave it alone, It doesn't need anything except to be left alone. And, that's the real frustration, especially for people who happen to be living in America right now with this embarrassment of a government. Right. It's really frustrating. But California is kind of its own country, and we've got some pretty strict rules, and everything's coming back to California, including the great white sharks, which is why there's just sightings all the time now, which I think is thrilling. The ecosystem here in a lot of ways is thriving. With that comes, sharks, and people just have to realize that. So that's the cheery side of the coin there.
So have you, on your travels and during your research, have you come across any organizations or initiatives that particularly impress you in the area of ocean conservation?
Yeah, I think that Hanley Prinsloo's I Am Water Foundation, I see how hard she works with Peter Marshall. I see the work they're doing and the impact it's having, and it's really impressive. What they do is they go to developing countries, and they teach the kids about the ocean and the relationship with the ocean and how the ocean affects them. Because on a lot of these islands, this is probably hard for a lot of people to believe, but Caribbean islands, like a lot of the locals just don't go in the water. Some of them don't even know how to swim. So they treat the ocean as a trash can. Right, yeah. They throw their garbage out there, but she takes them, she introduces them to the ocean. She introduces them to some really mellow free diving. She gets them to interact with the animals there, because the more they know about it, the more they're going to care about it. And I think it's that kind of grassroots, efforts that's what I think is going to make a difference. I'm a little more skeptical with the work that some larger organizations have been doing. But I'll just leave that out of it for now. I think these grassroots, smaller projects impacting one specific little area, that's how stuff's going to happen. And also, if I could just add one other thing is, how real change happens is at a government level. So you need some hardcore lobbyists. And that's where I think places like Conservation International can be really helpful, because all you have to do is change a few laws and the ocean will come back. Again, I'll use Palau as one of the only real great examples out there, in California as well. And that's all you need. But, what's it going to take? I guess we'll see.
So I have one question from one of our Patreon patrons. This is from, I'm going to butcher his name, Faron Tai Heron from Guam. Sorry, Faron, if I'm completely butchering your name. He'd like to know if any of the listeners want to get involved with conservation or research efforts that need free divers. Do you have any suggestions for them?
Oh, I think free divers would kill at that. So is he asking? Is he a free diver wanting to help out in some research? Oh, I see.
I think he's looking for like a specific organization or a project that he could get involved in.
Well, honestly, this is sort of a hot topic because a lot of academies and institutions, what they see of freediving is competitive freediving. So they don't want to be associated with it, which is exactly the problems that I've had in the past with cetacean communication. I say, hey, the only way to really commune with these animals is to freedive with them. They're like, oh, we can't do that. We have insurance policies, blah, blah, blah. So because they don't really understand that freediving can be done in a very safe, very methodological, like healthy way. I don't know any specific areas. I do know that we're going to need freedivers once we get our systems up and rolling, doing some cetacean research stuff. It's going to be pretty hairy stuff with 60-foot long clicking sperm whales, but to a lot of people, they'd really
Sounds
get a
awesome.
kick out of that. Yeah, I don't think we're going to have any. That's exactly. I don't think we're going to have any problem getting the qualified people to go out there and do that. And I can't wait to go out there and do it. At least, at minimum, to just entertain these whales for a while as they watch us, fumble around.
Right. So you have another book coming out later this year. And the subject matter is sure to appeal to free divers and breath holders, I guess, because apparently the book is about breath and breathing. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know too much about it. Perhaps you could give us a little insight into what to expect for that.
Sure. Yeah, that's in a very general sense. That's what it's about. But I stumbled through freediving in understanding how to breathe correctly, to hold my breath correctly. I stumbled upon some really amazing research into how breath affects absolutely every component of our body, our minds, and freedivers already know this because they have to learn how to breathe correctly in order to do what they do. But there's this whole other story that goes on land right now, and that's what I'm really exploring. And the backbone to that book is how we in many ways have lost the ability to breathe, both mechanically and through various psychological issues. And we're not breathing correctly. And that is a main contributor to tons of chronic diseases. And all of this stuff is just coming out now, this correlation between breathing and disease and breathing and health. And I'm working with researchers at Harvard and Stanford and some guys in Sweden and basically all over the world who are at the forefront of discovering what the problem is and how to fix it. And it's really, when I started this book, I was like, oh, this is gonna be really interesting. I'm looking forward to it. And now it's just like, it's really blowing my mind on a number of levels. The severity of how poorly we're breathing now, because of diet, because of our mouth size, because of various other environmental conditions. And I see it every day. Like everywhere I go, I'm witnessing how people are breathing, and it's crazy stuff. So I'm in the midst of that right now, and I wish I was breathing a little better a few weeks ago, and I maybe wouldn't have gotten this god awful flu. You can hear my voice starting to go a little bit now, but
okay. I think we're about 80% there.
Yeah.
So could I venture that we're going to be hearing a little bit about, perhaps things like what Wim Hof is involved in, maybe what Patrick McKeown is talking about in the oxygen advantage and things like this? Yeah.
Wim is an amazing dude, no doubt about it. He's already gotten a lot of ink. There's a lot of magazine stories about him, and his method is mind blowing, really impressive. But it's not really applicable for the mass general population. Like, I think of my mom, like, as much as I would love her to learn the Wim Hof method and help heal herself, she's not going to do it. So I'm working within some methods that are a little more accessible than his. I'm a huge fan of his. I think the guy is such an inspiration in how he's shown the really potential of the human body. But if you're talking about Patrick, Buteyko, I've been knee deep in the past 3 months reviewing the history of the Buteyko method, which, for listeners who aren't familiar with it, it's this Russian doctor who in the 50s found that breathing, had this theory that breathing was the cause of the majority of chronic maladies, and developed this way of breathing, which wasn't to breathe more, it was to breathe less. Mm-hmm. Because his whole theory was, we're breathing way too much and we're breathing out too much CO2. Mm-hmm. If we don't have the right amount of CO2, we can't distribute oxygen. And it's turning out that a lot, he was a really controversial guy. And a lot of serious researchers kind of poo-poo him, but a lot of what he was saying is turning out to be true. And that's exactly the area that I've become so fascinated with, that I've really been plumbing into pretty deeply lately.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really fascinated in that area, and I'm really looking forward to reading the book. I hope that you survive the plague and can get the book finished.
Yeah, me too. I'm hoping it's going to come out this year. It might come out a little later than that, but one step at a time. First, I've got to regain my ability to breathe properly here, and then before I write a book about breathing. But hopefully that's coming up soon. I'll just drink some more of this ginger tea and pet my dog and hope for the best.
Well, we're waiting with bated breath, so to speak.
You couldn't help it. You couldn't help it.
So yeah, let's just wind down with a few with the traditional Freedive Café questions. Do you have like a morning ritual?
I walk my dog. That's it. No breathing ritual, but I'm trying to involve some Buteyko style breathing while I'm walking my dog. But I've got a pretty young dog. She's eager to go out. So whether or not I like it, that's what I'm doing every morning.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty good way to start the day, though, isn't it?
It is. It gets you out out in the open, breathing some fresh air, and it's great. Yeah.
And I'm hoping that you have a good answer for this one because you are an author. Can you recommend a book or an author for the Freedive Café listeners?
Oh man!
Any subject of anyone you want.
Well, that's unfair because it has to be about the water. It has to be about. I mean, sure, they've all read Blue Mind by Wallace Nichols. Great dude. Great book. That's a good one. You know what? Here's one that you can just download offline, or online rather, right now, is Self-Reliance by Ralph Waldo Emerson. I'm just saying that because I'm sure no one else has said that on this program. I don't think.
For sure.
Yeah. I'm sure someone else has said Blue Mind. So but check that out. Get through the first page, and I think what he is saying is sort of where it's all at, especially now in this world filled with political turmoil, to just sort of heed his warnings and heed his advice.
Excellent. Yeah. Actually, no one has mentioned Blue Mind yet. So.
Oh, wow. You got a twofer right there. Yeah. There's a bonus one.
Two for the price of one. Nice. Thanks. Yeah. So what are your plans for the future? I mean, apart from getting the book out, do you have any grand plans, or is it just focus on the next book?
The first plan is to take this dog out who's staring at me with bated breath, waiting for the afternoon walk. But the second part of that is I'm in serious book writing mode. The way that books work, or at least the way I do them, is I go as hard as I can into research for a year. And then I take my, 4,000 pages of whatever I've gotten and boil it down into a book. So I'm in that mode now, which is why I'm up in the mountains doing that cliched writer thing. But after that, actually working on a few virtual reality projects, trying to show people who have never been in the ocean what it's like to be in the ocean. And I think that that's a really unique way of getting people to see this place that you and I and everyone else listening to this program sees all the time and appreciates. But if you think about the vast majority of people, they just don't know what's down there. If they don't know what's down there, they're not going to care about it. So that's on the horizon. And we hope to be going to Palau in the next couple of months to shoot some stuff and to get back in the water. And I'm pretty excited about that.
So will this be something like a kind of a video project where someone will be able to put on a headset and kind of experience a dive themselves with the whales or in a coral reef? Yeah,
that's exactly right. We put out a film with the New York Times called The Click Effect that came out like a year and a half ago, I think. And it's free to download off the New York Times VR app, and from the Within VR app. I definitely view it in a headset, and that took people into the world of freediving. It was all shot freediving with whales and dolphins and pilot whales, and talks about their communication. So we're going to do something different, but still are going to get people in the water, probably with other animals, and are going to be using a lot of freediving as well. And that's another hidden benefit when you're shooting in 360. Really hard to do that with scuba because there's bubbles all over. But if you do it with freediving, man, it just saves so much time, and people are really blown away that you're able to get all these shots because they had never thought about it because they don't dive. So that's our sort of secret weapon in all this.
Yeah, so the click effect, I didn't even know about that. I'll put that in the show notes for the guys who are listening. So is that something that you would use like an Oculus Rift for, or like can you put your smartphone in one of those little cases?
Yeah, you could do any of those. It's the film is available for free, and so you just download it onto your phone and view it into one of those little headsets, whether or not it's a Google Cardboard or an Oculus or whatever. And I think freedivers would get a kick out of it, because you can kind of see what we're doing. At least you'll understand what we're doing and where we're doing it, because we're shooting the whole thing freediving. It's the only film that's really been shot like that, using those methods, or it was, when it came out a year and a half ago.
Okay, James, we are finished with the questions, the official questions. So that was awesome. Thank you so much. It's been fascinating, and possibly we can get together again in the future sometime, maybe discuss your next book once it's out there circulating in the world. I hope you get better soon, and let's talk again sometime.
Excellent. Okay.
Take it easy. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That was Mr. James Nestor. I can't express how excited I am about his new book. I can assure you I'll have him back on the show to discuss that when it comes out. I really hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I've enjoyed creating it and making it available for your listening pleasure. If you ever have any questions or suggestions, feel free to contact me through the contact page on the website. You can also add me on Facebook, where I am Donny Mac, M-A-C, and on Instagram as Donny McFar, DONNYMCFAR. Don't forget to subscribe to the show so you don't miss an episode. And of course, as always, dive safe.